Welcome
Hello.
to another Historyologist podcast.
We're getting better at this. I mean, I assume so. I haven't seen any negative feedback. I haven't seen any feedback.
We're getting better at this long pause.
Unfortunately, Timbo is not here today to talk about whatever on earth he brought to the table last time.
Let's have a moment of silence in honour of Tim.
Not too long though, because when we removed the silences in the recording, so just...
Today, Alex, I've got a very exciting story to tell you.
Oh.
One we've spoken about before. It's the tale of the Bonaparte dynasty.
Are you telling me there was more than one old bony?
There was more than one old bony. It's something that's kind of interested me for a while because, you know, you think of these old dynasties like the Napoleon or the Habsburgs or whatever, and, you know, you just sort of think once they're kicked off the throne or they're, you know, deposed or whatever, they just, that's it. They just sort of, you know, dissolve into...
Yeah. They're all dead, kind of in that process of being in the flick, you know.
No one ever hears from him again. But I was very surprised to learn that not only did that not happen to the Bonapartes, they're still around. There is still a head of the house of Bonaparte, and they are still pretenders to the French throne.
So funny.
They have a legitimate, what some people would say, a legitimate claim to the French throne.
Napoleon saw the crown of France laying in the gutter and picked it up with his sword. You know, if that's not being ordained by God, well, I don't know what is.
So I thought we'd go through the different heads since Napoleon, or just go through the sort of the family history, and there's a colourful cast of characters that I think you'll really enjoy. So
Cool.
As the name suggests, it all starts with Napoleon Bonaparte. So he was born 1769. Great year. Fine vintage.
Funny number.
And he was born on Corsica, which had just recently, maybe 10 or so years before his birth, had just been...
Did you swap hands from India?
From
India. Italy to France? Or...
Yeah. So I can't remember if the French bought it but anyway, it was Italian or an Italian island.
Yeah.
The French bought it or it got transferred to France. So Napoleon actually grew up speaking Italian.
You have this fucked up accent.
Yeah, it would have been super... Imagine in Paris just like...
Well, what is it? I'm not definitely the first person to make this observation, but it's like you've got the person on the outside of the empire, on the fringe, who ends up being the most radical, pro-nationalist person like, you know, Stalin, born in Georgia, went off to be the leader of the Soviet Union. Look at Hitler. He's in Austria, and then, you know, famously continued to be Hitler and, you know, German Chancellor. And, you know, now you get old Boney here, technically not even fucking French.
No. So he, I think the Italian pronunciation of their name is Bonaparte. Yeah, so they became the Bonapartes. And actually, it's funny you say that about his accent, because he was bullied in school because of his dodgy accent.
It builds character, you know. You're like, okay, you know, obviously I can't do the accent, but it's like, oh yes, and you know, which one of you knows the answer? And it's like, oh yes, little Bonaparte. And he says, sounds like a deaf person, and he's like, oh god.
So his family was, they were local noblemen or you know, local bigwigs. They'd been mayors of, I think it's Ajaccio. I don't know how to say it. We'll say it Ajaccio, the capital of Corsica. So at a young age, he moved to France, Napoleon did, to pursue a military career, just like a lot of young men his age.
Do you have an older sibling that had already joined the academy as well, or was it the other little sibling that follows him in afterwards?
There's no way of knowing that information. That's been lost to us.
Who knows?
It's impossible to know that. But good question. but he got a distinction in artillery. And, fast forwarding a little bit, when the French Revolution broke out, Napoleon was on board. He loved a good revolution.
What's the line? Something like, the trouserless, French mob, turned and run the moment they got a whiff of any of my grape shots. I was just going. He loved the revolution. He was so behind it. He got stationed in Paris, or there was sort of pandemonium on the streets, and he's in Paris, and he just lines up with a bunch of artillery and just starts firing it at people. Pepper them.
And I think it was that just indiscriminately firing at a mob that. He became famous.
Oh, like, this guy, he's gone somewhere.
Yeah. Fame shot through the roof. He made a shitload of money. And he was given command of the army of Italy. So I can't remember if the French were doing campaigns in Italy, but they had sort of, if you imagine the border provinces, it was, I think the French had some Italian provinces, and he got command of that army.
Is this where he comes across to Egypt? Is that sort of around this?
Yes, I think so.
Because he famously brings 20,000 his French line infantry with him and artillery specialists, and they get there and they're having a good time and that, and then the English rock up and fuck them up a bit, and Napoleon just kind of leaves his whole army. Yeah, because he just bops back across the Med.
Because he got trapped there by the English, whose fleet is much better, and they controlled the English, controlled the Mediterranean more or less, and so he got trapped there, and he needed to get back to France because there was elections for the head of government. Yeah, and so through various sort of manoeuvrings, and I've got in my notes here, political shenanigans. Oh. Say no more.
Say no more.
He was elected first consul of France because they kind of modelled that, in their head they were like, it was the Roman Republic reborn. So the head of the government was a consul.
There was a triumvirate with his brother and some other dude as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, I forget their names.
And until Napoleon's like, the pretense is silly. Let's just. I am l'empereur.
Well, my notes are pretty extensive here. I've got, he was elected first consul of France, and then several years later was elected emperor of the French.
It was an incontested vote.
So that's a pretty good summary of 5 years of solid political action. And then it's a pretty well known story. Over the next decade or so, he pretty much fought the whole of Europe, or France did. If you've ever seen a map of the Napoleon's sort of French empire, it's pretty huge.
Yep. Did better than the mid-20th century armband enthusiasts did about 100 years later, I think.
Yeah. He did all right. He did all right. Until he stopped doing all right.
It's like a hero did come along. Oh, Wellesley. And did had to put old Boney in his place.
Yeah.
And it's funny, actually, a couple of years ago when I was learning about Mr. Bonaparte and stuff, and it's testament to what the public education is in Tasmania, because I suddenly found myself being like, hang on, Mount Wellington, Duke of Wellington, oh, where everyone gets pissed on Friday and Saturday night, Salamanca. It's like, they're all names and places of the Napoleonic Wars, because Tasmania was a colony concurrently at around the same time. So it was just like, oh, neat.
So he fought all the various coalitions. I think there were 7 coalitions in total. He very foolishly tried to, invade Russia. That never goes well.
Yeah, but what's worse? The dude who did it once and famously failed, or the dude who did it 100 years later thinking like, nah, it's gonna be
Yeah.
The outcome's going to be different.
So after losing against all these coalitions, Napoleon was forced to abdicate his emperorship and go into exile on his home island.
It's very generous of them, honestly.
Or to Elba. Anyway, doesn't matter.
I think it was Corsica, and then later it's Alba.
That's right, yeah. And then he, and then he thought he'd come back. So he went into exile, and then he's just returned. It's called the 100 Days. He came back, and people were like, yes,
yep,
you're the emperor again.
I love the term 100 days. I use it all the time. Just like, oh yeah, but Christmas, and you're like, yeah, well, since then, the 100 days,
So he's become emperor again, and he's rallied everyone up and launched a big, huge thing. And everyone in Europe, especially the British, were like, "We can't have this. This is dangerous."
Did you ever see the? I think it was in 1963 movie Waterloo.
No.
It's so goddamn cool, right? Because they didn't have, obviously, CGI and extras and stuff. So they filmed this movie in the Ukraine with, like, the Red Army. They did some sort of deal, and you had just, like, 100,000 actual dudes all in proper French, whatever. And you get the big shots of them all forming, their squares in the horizon. And even just, like, when, like, the Lord of the Rings is cool. But you don't get, like, the glittering off armor and swords and stuff like that. And yeah, anyway, I'd highly recommend the
I'll check it out.
But you've got this big scene, and he's standing there, and he's like, and you're like, I am your emperor, and if you want to come and arrest me, But I love France. And so give us the flag a kiss, and everyone's just like, oh, la emperor. Anyway, sorry, go on.
But, well, the Battle of Waterloo, pretty famous, but he lost. Spoiler.
He had a nap in the middle of the afternoon. Just
dumb. So he abdicated, or was forced to abdicate for the second time, and he spent his last years in exile on a small Atlantic island, St. Helena.
Yep.
And if you can look it up on Google, the picture of his little cabin that he's...
Yep.
It's just this crappy cabin. Looks like a good as good a spot as any to live.
I had this pitch for a movie idea a couple of years ago, and I've never been able to get anyone excited enough to film it, because I'm happy to buy the Napoleon Bonaparte costume, all of that, right? But it's like, you get Napoleon 1, right? And then you get Napoleon 2, Waterloo, right? And what if you did Napoleon 3? So it's like, what if he returned again? Because the story comes in 3 parts.
That's an idea.
It's an idea.
But I guess importantly for the Bonaparte dynasty, more or less Napoleon died, and he left him a shitload of titles.
Yep.
They were kings of freaking everywhere.
Didn't he make his, like, brothers and cousins and that, like, the...
King of Naples, king of Spain, king of the Netherlands, I think, or king of king of Netherlands, I think it was.
His brother took over from, not the Habsburgs, but they took over in Spain.
They were dukes of freaking everywhere. So, they started just as like these minor Italian nobles, and then French sort of power players, as it were. But after he dies, the head of the succession went to his son, Napoleon II, and he actually reigned as emperor for a very short time, for 3 weeks. Pretty short reign.
I mean,
could be that he was only 4 years old, so he didn't really have much. Didn't have much say on policy.
Just trying to think, like, when did we do the Battle of the Gods thing? That was 3 weeks ago, maybe. So it's like, that was your whole reign. Kid was set up for failure. Was it the politicking, like, from more of an international sort of coalition or in parliamentary sort of side that deposed his 3-week reigning son, or was it more family sort of being like, can't, too young.
It was politicking.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. So the Republic was restored.
Yeah.
They call it the Second Republic. They got good naming conventions.
Or at least they acknowledge it.
Napoleon II, I guess he was deposed, or the Republic was restored. He moved to Austria. So he moved there with his mother, who was the daughter of the Austrian emperor.
Right.
Right, that makes sense. So Napoleon II, he was granted the title of... So the emperor, the Austrian emperor, was Napoleon II's grandfather.
Yep.
Right, and so he was granted the title Duke of Reichstag by his grandfather, and he went by France, which is the German version of his French name, Francois.
Okay. Yep.
And like his old man, he joined the military, and he was showed some of the same capabilities of his dad. He was sort of going places, and he was very skilled or knew a lot about mathematics.
Yeah, pepper you from a mile away with some artillery.
And sort of a lot of, I guess all these other European leaders were sort of following his progress a little bit, and he was making them very nervous.
Like, okay, so what? We just defeated Paul Atreides, and like, what do you mean?
Yeah,
Leto's coming.
And so the Emperor of Austria, he gave this guy Napoleon II command of a unit at the age of 21.
Yeah,
just maybe he did it to just antagonize people a little bit, just to see what they reckon. Buttons a little bit. And then Napoleon II died of tuberculosis shortly after that.
It's unlucky.
Yeah, in Vienna. So
bloody Arthur Morganed himself.
Yeah. So that was the end of Napoleon II.
It's like, character gets tuberculosis, and you have a quick Google, when did tuberculosis get cured? And you're like, oh, just missed it.
And so the line of succession went to Joseph Bonaparte, who was Napoleon's older brother. So Napoleon I's older brother. And he had a pretty wild ride.
He was the one, I think, who did a lot of the politicking with Napoleon in his early life.
So he was a trained lawyer.
Yeah.
And after sort of Napoleon sort of rose up through the ranks, he sort of brought his family with him as well. Yeah. And so Joseph Bonaparte, he had various positions in the revolutionary government, like he was ambassador to Rome.
Yeah.
And he had positions on various other councils. And when the time came, he helped Napoleon overthrow the government so Napoleon could become the emperor. Yeah. So, he was definitely in his brother's camp.
Yeah.
After Napoleon became emperor, he installed Joseph as the King of Naples.
There you go. So, there you go, bro. Thank you very much.
Yep. Thanks for helping me become emperor. You're the King of Naples.
Let me know if I can do anything else for you.
But it seems like Joseph was a sort of serious guy. He even though there was a bit of nepotism in there, he knew what to do.
Yeah. And look, it's a dynasty. You can be have a little bit of nepotism's fine,
Yeah, absolutely. And so he had many like he didn't just put fluff guys in as his ministers and stuff. He put the right guys in, the most capable, to try and get Naples running really well, and he brought in all these reforms to try and modernise Naples, which was sort of lagging behind a little bit.
Yeah.
And people in Naples loved him. They thought he was a great king and very well intentioned.
I love it. How many years after the Napoleonic Wars was this? Was within 20 years still?
Well, his reign as King of Naples, it only lasted 2 years.
All right, so probably not then. Okay. Because I'm going to say, all of this would be very fresh in the minds of Europe,
It gets better, because he was replaced by his brother-in-law, who will remain unnamed. And then Joseph was made the King of Spain. So King of Naples became the King of Spain. And in Spain, he was massively unpopular. I think it's because Napoleon needed a guy that he could trust in Spain.
Well, because there was a point in Napoleon's conflict, I can't remember which, because there's a bunch of famous generals, Napoleon's, but because Wellesley, he was sort of fortifying Portugal, but it's sort of become like the whole war in the peninsula became this really bad Quango kind of, like Napoleon's trying to head off to Russia and do his thing, but like that he's actually getting bogged down, like, you know, send, I think the English only had like 10,000, 5,000, something like that, but that was still stopping the hundreds of thousands of French troops in there, and it just kept dividing the attention and just became a whole and guerrilla warfare scenario, and the Spanish weren't really having any of it.
No, there's lots of Spanish revolts against the French king, and in 1813 Joseph eventually abdicated on the back of all that, and the British were, you know, essentially the British kicked him out. Yeah,
we're not having any of it. I'm sorry.
Around the same time, Tasmania was colonised. So
neat.
But yeah, there was, after Napoleon got defeated, there was lots of loyalists, I guess, in France that thought Joseph was the rightful emperor. Yeah. But he never did anything with it. He spent the rest of his life just travelling around being a bum.
I was going to say, he sounds more like a Paul than a Leto II.
Well, kind of. He travelled through America, where he lived on jewels that he stole from France. Then he moved to London, moved to France, where he died.
So at a certain point, his political ambitions peaked, and then he just sort of just cruised through on his monies.
Yeah. So that was Joseph Bonaparte, and then we had Louis Bonaparte, who was the head of the dynasty for 2 years in the 1840s.
Such a French thing to have a Louis.
Yeah. And the highlights of his, I'll keep the highlights of his life, where he was the King of Holland for 4 years, and he was accused by Napoleon I of putting Dutch interests above the French.
Shock face.
Pretty rude.
Just realised the look on my face wasn't audible.
Yeah. And in my note too, it says he died to death. So there you go.
He died to death.
Yeah.
It's a bad way to go.
Now we make it to Napoleon III, or Charles Louis Napoleon Bonaparte.
Best things come in threes.
He was Napoleon I's nephew.
Yeah.
He was the son of Louis Bonaparte.
Right.
So there's sort of succession passed to him, and so he grew up as like this sort of French prince that wasn't really a prince, and you know, like when was he? He was born in.
Where was he living?
Oh, so he was born in 1808. So it was right around the height of Napoleon's power. Yeah. So, and then he was sort of growing up in the struggles after that of the various Napoleon.
Just bore witness to the bizarreness of Napoleon coming back.
Yeah.
You know, and then...
Yeah. And I believe the French republics had a law that claimants or pretenders to the throne weren't allowed to live in France. So, you know, he lived in various places, like in Switzerland, you know, spent some time in Germany, just sort of moving around. He lived in London for a while, where he kind of lived it up as... You know, I'm imagining a socialite, you know, like he wasn't really doing anything, but he's just sort of whining and dining people.
Be like, there's some busty lass walks past with the tray of drinks. He's like, you know, I'm a Napoleon.
At some point, sort of in the late 1830s, because he was the head of the house and therefore the main claimant to the French imperial throne, he thought it would be a good time to launch a coup and try and claim that throne. And the great thing was he in London he sort of he got this support and got a couple of ships and had sort of 40 or so men, set sail across the channel, and landed on the beach and just got arrested by the French police.
It's so good.
Didn't even make it off the beach.
I can't remember the quote, if it was attributed to World War One or the Napoleonic Wars, but it was something like, it may have even been like Bismarck, sort of like, and he goes, it's like, sir, the English expeditionary force is arriving, going to land on the beach or whatever, and his response was meant to be something like, okay, well, we'll send the police to go and arrest them then, because there's going to be 20,000 or at most, because the Brits' power was mainly sort of sea-based and seafaring, whereas they didn't have armies the size of the continents. It's like, yeah, let them land, do it. We'll have them arrested. There will not be a battle.
So yeah, he got arrested on the beach from this coup. I think it was 1848. Doesn't matter. They sent him to jail. And he was very unhappy in jail. Surprise, surprise. But the newspapers loved it. They thought it was the funniest thing ever. Both British and French papers just thought it was so stupid.
Just sort of ripping him up.
Yeah. One paper in France said, "This surpasses comedy."
Yeah, he's sitting there and just like reading the paper, just white knuckling, like.
But yeah, when he was in prison, he wrote some poems, some political essays, very Adolf Hitler, writing the political essays and
struggle
and articles on diverse topics.
Right.
Yeah. So he wrote some articles for regional papers all over France, all from jail, and eventually he broke out of prison.
He broke out, did he?
Yeah.
Like from a chain gang kind of thing, or did he? Like Shawshank Redemption, like behind a poster, he's just been chiseling away with a spoon for the last 20 years.
Even better, he disguised, with the help of his doctor and a couple of other friends on the outside, he disguised himself as a labourer carrying lumber and just walked out.
Okay, good on him.
So he went back to London. He knows what it's about there.
Like so it's like Andy Dufresne. We never saw him again that day. He tasted freedom.
But so he's back to London, back to the London high life. He met Charles Dickens.
Uh-huh. That's a funny crossover.
Yeah, had a couple of wines with him. And he was on good terms with Benjamin Disraeli, the English PM, or British PM.
Fair enough.
But there you go. And then
during it's just sitting around having a port sort of thing, and be like, "Hey, remember that time you tried to invade France and got arrested on the beach with 40 men?" And he's like, "Ha ha ha ha." It's like, yes, well, you have to try. You miss every shot you don't take.
So in France, there was a revolution in 1848, and I think they had a constitutional monarchy at the time, the Bourbon monarchy, which the Bourbon family still exists, by the way, and still claiming the throne. But there you go. And so Louis Philippe abdicated, and Napoleon in London was like, "This is my time to go.
This is it."
Yeah. So he's come across. He drummed up a bit of support. Ran for one of the National Assembly positions. Didn't get elected. So missed out on that. But then there was the presidential election later on that year, and he ran a very good campaign by all reports, and he was elected.
El Presidente of the Republic.
Yeah, he won 74% of the vote.
That's a big landslide if you think about it, because usually even now it's down to a couple of points. That's why everyone's unhappy all the time.
And yeah, so he had his first 4 years or 3 years of presidency, and I think his main aim to begin with was having a permanent presidency, i.e., being the emperor.
Yeah. If you are like the descendant of Napoleon Bonaparte, being president, that's fine, but it's not really what,
Doesn't measure up.
It doesn't measure up at all.
Doesn't measure up at all. He launched a self-coup towards the end of his presidency. Where he had his own army march in. In effect, sort of had like a martial law kind of thing happening. Re-elected himself. And then to show that he had a mandate for government, he had a national plebiscite, asking if the voters agreed with the coup. The results of that plebiscite are highly unusual. Something... So 7.5 million people voted in favour of it.
Yep.
And 600,000 voted against it. So it's like 95% in favour or something like that. So it seems totally fair. No questions to be asked there.
Do you think during like the whole thing with the coup and stuff, like it was all pretty transparent what he was doing, or do you reckon like as the armies come in to proclaim him or whatever, and then they have these, he's like, oh no, impossible, I couldn't, no, but I am merely the first, man of France. I couldn't possibly, and but if you twist my arm, I suppose I could.
Yeah.
Like Julius Caesar style. Like if you insist, I will be your leader.
Well, on the back of the election, he had the mandate, and he sort of amended the constitution so that he was automatically elected president at the end of his term. That's a good amendment.
It's like, look, it says right there.
It brought in a couple of different authoritarian measures to sort of solidify his rule.
Wasn't he like super like efficient though, and everyone thought he was just fucking great?
Yeah, like he did his job, and then maybe a year later, apparently there was like people walking around the street with like these banners that were like Napoleon III, Emperor. So he took that as a mandate to have another referendum. This referendum was whether to elect him Emperor of the French, and again, slightly contentious results. 97% of French nationals voted in favour of that proposition. So obviously it was passed. He proclaimed the Second French Empire, and he became Napoleon III, Emperor of the French.
Which is amazing.
Yeah.
Can you imagine, I'm guessing at this point you'd have quite an old Wellesley, maybe having already been, he's having his presidentship in the UK, just sort of sitting there reading the paper. It's like, Napoleon, what? What do you mean, number 3? What? It's like, what the fuck was any of this for?
So he spent his years of empire, getting involved in various European politics. He modernized or tried to modernize France quite a lot.
Sorry, I just sort of because the note there is just search for wife. It's like as a dot point of his life.
He got involved with the Crimean War and the British, had a couple of campaigns down in Italy, tangled with the papacy a bit, built up the French overseas empire quite a bit.
Here's a thing that's slightly not related at all, but kind of interesting. With Crimea, the VC, Victoria Cross medals?
Yeah.
It's the highest honour for valour or whatever. Those VCs are made from melted down, captured Russian cannons from the Crimean War. And it's like, when you get a VC for doing something very brave, very stupid, but, maybe survived, maybe didn't. It's pretty much an analogy for what the Crimean War was. So it's, it actually melted down Russian cannons, which I thought was pretty cool. I think the quote is something like, it was brilliant. It was tremendous, but it wasn't war.
But yeah, I guess one thing what he's most known for is his tangles with Prussia, or with the North German Confederation. So there was a bit of back and forth between him and Bismarck.
Mm-hmm. The man himself.
Bismarck kind of got the better of him. Napoleon thought, I've got to invade Germany and put them down now. That declaration of war kind of solidified the German cause, and they all banded together. Essentially, the Germans won. On the back of that, they proclaimed the German Empire, which is the kind of the... Is it the Second Reich? Yeah, that's kind of the Reich of the First World War.
Yeah.
So Napoleon kind of had a big hand in that, and he his emperorship kind of just fizzled out after he lost the war.
This is the Franco-Prussian.
Yeah, after he lost the Franco-Prussian War and the German Empire was declared, all support for his emperorship in France just disintegrated, and so he abdicated, and that was it. He just kind of fizzled out, and he died a couple of years later in London, I think.
It's like literally the story of, the Treaty of Versailles or whatever at the end of World War One.
Yeah.
Being signed in the train cart in the paddock or whatever was a callback to the same embarrassing settlement in the same whatever, and then 20 years after that, Hitler finds the same old train cart, gets them to sign the piece of paper. It's like it's all very, very, very much in the collective memory.
So that it was a bit of a wild ride for Napoleon III. Next up on the throne of Bonaparte is his son, Napoleon, Prince Imperial. That was his name.
That's sick.
He had a wild ride too. He moved into exile with his dad into London, and he joined the British Army. And then he died at a young age fighting the Zulus in South Africa.
That's badass. That is a badass though.
Yeah.
You could have easily have said he died of malaria just being near this, being in South Africa.
And so after Napoleon Prince Imperial, we have Victor Prince Napoleon, also known by loyalists as Napoleon V.
When we say loyalist, so we do you reckon he's got like a gaggle of like an entourage that's just always following around the...
I don't know. But I'm looking at a picture of him, and he's always wearing like these big sort of German style trench coats, and he's got this huge sort of mustache. He kind of looks like like an Al Capone type gangster or something. But look, he had a pretty uneventful life. He couldn't live in France because Pretender can't live in France. He got involved in or mixed up in the Dreyfus affair, which I don't know too much about, but it was a thing.
Yep. It was quite the affair.
Yeah. I think it was a sort of a plot where they tried to restore the French throne. It was a plot to kick out the government and put a king back on the throne, and I think this guy was one of the...
It's like the French, the heart of every Frenchman screams, yearns for a king.
Yeah. Right, and then he had a pretty uneventful life. I don't know what he did in World War One, but he died in 1926 in Brussels. And he was succeeded by his son, Louis, Prince Napoleon, who had a...
It'd be funny if Prince wasn't a title, they're just that far removed now, he's just made Prince his middle name.
Yeah. But if his dad, Victor, is an Al Capone gangster, this guy looks like James Bond. And
had a bit of a cultural shift there.
Yeah. So he was actually born in Brussels because again couldn't live in France.
Yeah.
And so he had a sort of uneventful life. Like these people, they just sort of lived at like the European high life, like just living at parties and drinking champagne and stuff. And people were like, yeah, I'd love to see you back on the throne. He's like, yeah, awesome.
You're like, do you know who this guy is? He's like, I don't think we've had the pleasure. I'm Napoleon V.
Yeah.
Like, no shit. Wow. Okay. Interesting.
But the cool thing about this guy is at the outbreak of the Second World War, he wanted to fight. Like he really wanted to fight for France.
Yeah.
But he couldn't join the French army, I don't think. So
This is, I imagine, during the time where there's a German provisional government occupying France as well.
So he offered to join the French army, but was refused. So he joined the French Foreign Legion, seeing action in North Africa, and he was demobilised in 1941. And then he joined the French Resistance, and was arrested by the Germans attempting to cross the Pyrenees on his way to London to join the French leader Charles de Gaulle.
Yeah.
So after he was arrested, he was shipped around to different prisons. He was released for some reason, and he did join. He joined another French resistance group, and he actually narrowly escaped death when he was on a 7-man patrol that came under attack, and he was the sole survivor.
You'd just be standing like, the 3 guys to the left of you and the 3 guys to the right have just disappeared and missed. And you're like, oh, fuck.
And then after the war, he lived in Switzerland, or sometime in Paris, when the law was against the banishment was rescinded. But yeah, he was sort of like a businessman, made a shitload of money doing lots of different things. So if that's not cool enough, all the stuff he did in the war, when the German emperor, or the German emperor who'd been deposed in World War One, Wilhelm, when he died in 1951, Louis Napoleon, all he did was just send a wreath to the funeral that just had an N on it. Napoleon.
Yeah.
Because the Wilhelm's family, the Hohenzollerns, they were the ones that deposed Napoleon III. So it's like kind of seen as a bit of a middle finger to...
That's so funny.
But he...
so send my regards.
Yeah. So he lived a long time. He died in 1997, this guy.
Christ,
And
that is so funny. It's because at that point the Franco-Prussian War almost would have been 100 years ago. You've just the wreath and brilliant.
So I think he had some sort of falling out with his son.
Yep.
His son, who was called Charles Napoleon, or Prince Charles Napoleon. And so when he was an old age, he designated his grandson as the heir apparent.
Yep.
His grandson is Jean-Christophe.
Was his son some kind of disgusting Republican or something, as opposed to
I don't know. It's probably like he bought him the wrong champagne or something. They bought him off-brand.
This is just bubbly wine.
Yeah.
This isn't champagne.
And then, it kind of gets a bit boring after that, because Charles Napoleon and Jean-Christophe Napoleon, even though they are claimants to the throne, they more or less a businessman. Like Jean-Christophe, he's like a merchant banker or something, and he worked for Chase Manhattan or something in Wall Street, and so they just make all this shitload of money. And
it's so bizarre to think, and I'm just trying to think of maybe a better example of maybe the rich aristocracy sort of thing, but it's you've got 4 or 5 levels below Napoleon. You could have had someone like hanging out on like Epstein's Island with Stephen Hawking and all those guys, you know what I mean? Like
with Stephen Hawking.
Yeah, Stephen Hawking was on the list. Hilariously, I mean, it's probably not true. It's probably just to muck up the thing. But apparently, old Mr. Hawking was into well, like obviously he couldn't do anything, but he'd sit and watch a bunch of dwarf women climb over each other to try and do equations on a chalkboard that they were too short to reach.
But yeah, so that's the Bonapartes. Like I said at the start, I just think it's really fascinating that, you've got this imperial family from, it seems so far removed, Napoleonic Wars and all that kind of stuff. And
absolutely.
But you've still got heads of this dynasty running around today, and the actual claimants to the French throne.
It's just like, I don't know, like, you go back and you way back when machine, your TARDIS, your time machine, whatever you want to call it, you sit down and you have dinner with Napoleon. So let's presume you actually could understand what he was saying. You're like, mate, what if I could show you where your dynasty is going to be in 5 generations' time? And he'd be like, oh, yeah, I just imagined the greatness of the French Empire or whatever. And it's like, no, check this out. And you jump ahead to 2025 and you're like, Didn't count it. He's like, and yes, this is his office. It's just a dude. Walks his dog, you know.
And just to wrap it up, a bit of an interesting one. This guy was never the head of the Bonaparte family, but if you remember, Jerome Bonaparte sort of moved to America and spent a lot of time there. His grandson, who went by Charles Joseph Bonaparte, he became like a big, sort of worked his way up and became high up in the American government. Yeah. He was Secretary of the Navy, and he later became the Attorney General of the US. And during his time as the Attorney General, he formed the Bureau of Investigation, which then later on became the FBI.
For fuck's sake.
So the Bonapartes formed the FBI.
Isn't it like, okay, so there's, you know, there's obviously some differences here, but like, especially there's 110 years difference, right? But for all intensive purposes, right, maybe with the exception of the Holocaust or whatever, you've got two men with the ambition of their empire spreading across Europe, right? They both go into Russia. Now, the Bonapartes had a little, had an easier ride of it, I'd say, because it's, you know, it's bad luck not bad luck, but it's not a good thing to kill a king. So he got exiled a few times in that. But like, it's funny that like Hitler like declared himself emperor, and then you had what are the Hitlers doing now? It's like on a game show or something. You know, it's just an absurd thing to fucking think about. It's like, yeah, that Adolf guy is really bad, but you know, Adolf the fourth, you know, he's like one of the best snooker players.
Well, that's the tale of the Bonapartes.
That was a history, a moment in time.
Thanks for listening, and good day.
Good luck.